the Cabri G2 is like worlds better. The ultimate battle in two-seat helicopters. Now, I just want to be fully transparent and clear. I am coming from a Robinson background. I did all of my training on the Robinson R22 and the Robinson R44. However, I have flown the Cabri or Cabri or however you want to say it. I think I'm going to try to say Cabri in this video, but I have flown the Cabri G2 as well, so I can speak to both of these. But we are going to take a deep dive into both of these helicopters, so smash that like button and let's get into it. So it's pretty well known that Robinson and the Robinson R22 is by far the most popular training helicopter in the world. There are a couple other companies that can kind of compete with it, like Schweitzer and Instrom, and now Cabri is coming up and catching up to Robinson, but by far Robinson blows the competitors out of the water. However, recently within the last couple months, Instrom has filed for bankruptcy, but it looks like they're being bought by a different company and they will kind of come back, but I'm not totally sure exactly what's up with them. On the market right now, we've got Cabri and Robinson, and their flagship training platforms are the G2 and the R22. So to figure out which is the better helicopter, we are going to discuss 6 categories and come up with a winner of each of the 6 categories. Category 1 is performance, category 2 is design, category 3 is features, category 4 is comfort and cool factor, category 5 is safety, and category 6 is price. So starting with category number 1, performance. Both the Cabri G2 and the Robinson R22 feature the Lycoming O-360 J2A engine. So according to the pilot's operating handbook, the G2 can pull 145 horsepower for continuous power and 160 horsepower for its 5-minute takeoff power. The Robinson R22 can pull 124 horsepower for its continuous power and 131 horsepower for its 5-minute takeoff power. So kind of confusing that they both have the exact same engine, but they can pull different power limits. The reason I believe this is I think that Robinson is more conservative and they kind of want to limit how much power you pull at the start so that if you need more power, you have it accessed and you're not running the engine at 100%. Versus Cabri, on the other hand, they say you have this engine, you can use pretty much all of it whenever you want. You can use 0 to 100%, and anything more than 100%, you're going to be tapped out. Versus Robinson, if you pull more than 100%, it's got a little bit more to give you. The other thing with the Robinson derating their engine and limiting how much power you can pull is that it kind of prevents a low rotor RPM situation. The reason why is even if you keep pulling and pulling and pulling, there's more power than you're expecting probably, and there's just a pretty big reserve versus the Cabri does not have that reserve. Also, this was very interesting as I was doing research for this. Even though they both have the exact same engine, the Robinson R22 has a max gross takeoff weight of 1,370 pounds versus the Cabri, which can take off at 1,543 pounds. So I'm just a pilot and an instructor, and my best understanding and educated guess as to the reason why is the same reason as like the performance I was just explaining. Robinson is just more conservative and they say, hey, don't bring as much stuff, and we want you to have that extra power in the event that you need it. You also get you get better high altitude performance because you're leaving some power in reserve. Versus the Cabri is like, no, you can bring more weight, but you're not going to have anything extra, so you need to be better with your energy management, with your power management. The Robinson R22 can operate at a maximum density altitude of 14,000 feet, and the G2 can operate at a maximum pressure altitude of 13,000 feet. Now, a little bit different, we're talking about density altitudes and pressure altitudes. They don't use the same altitude definition, and you can do that calculation yourself, but it's really not that important. They're pretty close in how high they can fly. Okay, here is probably the biggest performance difference between the helicopters. You're already starting to see that the Cabri seems to have a little bit more performance and they're just a little bit looser, but here is the biggest thing. The G2 can carry 45 gallons of fuel, which is 170 liters, and it has a single tank. So 45 gallons in a single tank. Versus the Robinson R22 can carry 26.3 gallons, which is about 100 liters, and that is divided between a main fuel tank and a smaller auxiliary fuel tank. So 45 gallons versus 26.3 gallons. That is a significant difference in the amount of fuel. I mean, that's literally 18 gallons. And let's put it into context. If you conservatively say the 0360, the Lycoming 0360 J2A engine burns about 10 gallons per hour. How you do the math is you take 46 gallons divided by 10 gallons per hour, and you get in the ballpark of about 4.5 hours of flight time. And if you do that same math with the Robinson R22, if you take 26.3 gallons of fuel divided by a fuel burn of 10 gallons per hour, you get about 2.5 hours. I mean, 4.5 hours versus 2.5. I mean, I don't need to explain this to you, but it's obviously clear how significant of a difference that is. The other thing with this, and we will get into this into like the features and safety section of that category, but the Cabri has a fuel calculation system, an electronic fuel calculation system. And what it'll do for you is it will constantly keep updating, and it will spit out a amount of flight time you have left. So it's like you have 2 hours and 30 minutes, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it's a physical display on the screen. Versus the Robinson R22, if anyone has ever flown this, you'll know that you've got two gauges, a main fuel tank gauge and an auxiliary fuel tank gauge, and the needles kind of move at different paces, and then when the auxiliary fuel tank one runs out, the main fuel starts going much faster, and you don't know exactly how much fuel you have. So not that that's necessarily a bad system, but the Robinson fuel gauge system, in comparison to the Cabri G2, with a time and amount of flight time left, the Cabri G2 is like worlds better. I mean, think about how much of a safety feature that is to know that if I continue flying at this cruise power setting, I've got this much flight time left. That makes you so much safer versus trying to read a needle that may move, and it just doesn't feel as comforting. Okay, also another super important big difference in the performance thing. The R22 has a seat weight of 240 pounds. Now what they say for this seat weight thing is a 240 pound max seat weight in combination of the seat plus what is underneath the seat in the baggage compartment area. So for example, you could have a 190 pound guy sitting on the seat with 50 pounds of gear underneath, and that taps it out. It's not like 240 pound person plus what's underneath. So 240 pound seat weight in the Robinson R22 versus the Cabri. From what I found and what I've heard, there is not a seat weight limit. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm pretty confident that there is not a seat weight. I mean, 240 pounds for a pilot, I mean, you want to be like relatively slim to be able to fly, but to allow a bigger dude or a bigger female to sit and fly and not be restricted, that's going to allow a lot more people into this helicopter. Okay, continuing on with performance, the Robinson R22 has a maximum never exceed speed, V&E, velocity to never exceed, of 102 knots. Versus the Cabri, its V&E, velocity to never exceed, is 130 knots, which is nearly 30 knots faster. So it is utterly clear that in the performance category, the Cabri G2 wins handedly. Okay, moving on to the design category. The Cabri G2 and the Robinson R22, they're similar looking, but there are some pretty massive differences. The Robinson R22 has a two-bladed, semi-rigid, underslung teetering rotor system versus the Cabri has a three-bladed articulated rotor system. Okay, we'll talk about it in the safety thing, but right there, pretty big difference in the safety thing. Those three blades and that rotor system design is going to give you a lot more safety, and it's going to be a lot more forgiving than that two-bladed underslung mass bumping type of capability in the Robinson. The R22 has a two-bladed exposed teetering tail rotor, and the Cabri has a seven-bladed shrouded Fenestron tail rotor. But back to the main rotor, the Robinson R22 with its two blades, its rotor diameter is 25 feet 2 inches. But the Cabri, even though it has a three-bladed rotor system, the rotor diameter is 23.6 feet. And what this means is, let's say you have a confined area like a circle and you need to make an approach in. The Cabri is actually, it's got a smaller surface area to make that approach in. However, when it comes to storage, the Robinson is significantly easier to store in like a hangar or something because those blades are in line with the body of the helicopter. But the Cabri can actually fit into a smaller area. Both of them have very easily accessible engines and it's very easy to climb up to the rotor system. However, from what I've seen and when I was walking around in person, the Cabri's engine is actually higher and you can kind of just open the cowling and just look and you don't really have to bend down. Everything you need is really easily accessible versus the Robinson is pretty accessible and you can get to most things. It's just not as easy. So like I said, I came from the Robinson platform and I'm very comfortable speaking about it because I've spent a lot of time looking at it and touching it. But the Robinson, how it works is you have an engine that is mounted and you start the engine with the key and the engine starts by itself. And then you engage the clutch and the clutch moves the upper drive shaft up, which causes those belts to tension and then causes the engine to spin the drive shaft. So the drive shaft is moving up. Now, what I heard and what I think to understand about the Cabri is that the drive shaft is rigidly mounted, but what the engine does is the engine actually pivots, and as it pivots down, it increases tension on those belts, and that's how the engine and the drive system connect. So versus moving the drive shaft versus the Cabri moves the engine. But I just heard that in passing. I'm not willing to die on that hill. And it also has that shrouded tail rotor, but that's pretty much it on the outside. But let's talk about the inside things. So by far the biggest thing you'll notice when you immediately jump in is the center cyclic. A lot of people hate the Robinson T-bar style cyclic, and when I fly it, it's not a problem at all. Like, I don't even think about it. It's just fine. It works how I think. But when I got in the Cabri and like a Bell 206 or something with that center mounted cyclic, it's nice. It feels good. It feels like you're really flying a helicopter, and the T-bar works, but it's just not great. I also really liked the foot window chin bubble thing. When you're sitting in it, you can see out the bottom. The Robinson doesn't have it, and not that it really affects my flying at all, and it doesn't really matter, but it's a nice feature and I think it looks cool and it's fun. Also, what I like about the Cabri is on the left hand on the collective, the throttle, it's still a twist grip throttle at the end. However, it's a smaller surface area and I like that. The other thing is, on the actual collective bar, the friction is just a twist friction, so you can twist on friction or twist off friction. It's kind of like a roller. Versus on the Robinson, it's like this weird like white flick up switch to add friction. And I just think that roll on or roll off is pretty nice. Okay, immediately one of my favorite things about the interior is the mixture control. So yes, this is a carbureted engine. The Cabri has a carburetor and the Robinson has a carburetor. In the Robinson R22, the mixture control is like a plunger style metal rod that you push in to send fuel to the carburetor, and then you pull out to lean it and turn the engine off. However, in the Cabri, above the pilot's heads, you have a mixture control. And so I'm not exactly sure which positioning, and if I'm showing you a picture right now, you'll see, but all the way forward or all the way back is full ridge or full lean. What I love about this from the instructor perspective is I don't have to worry about a student inadvertently pulling the mixture when they think they're pulling carb heat. I mean, this is like a constant fear and concern, and something I'm paying attention to is when my student goes to pull carb heat to make sure that we don't get carburetor icing, I always watch their hand to make sure that they don't pull the mixture. When it's up there, there's no thought about it. Also, when thinking about carburetor heat, the Cabri has auto carburetor heat. For anyone that doesn't know, the carburetor mixes fuel and air together and sends that to the engine to be burned. But that process through the Venturi it gets very cold in there and you can have ice formed. So what we do is we send warm air that mixes with the fuel so that ice can't form. So that's really important. But in the Robinson, they kind of have some of the newer, I think the Beta 2s, they have that kind of auto carb heat assist, but it kind of works, but it's not that great. Versus in the Cabri, it's like an electrical monitored system that will increase the carb heat flow or decrease it for the performance, and it is making those calculations. It can be overridden, but I like that fuel mixture control. I like that the carb heat is auto. It makes you not have to think about it. Kind of like a fuel injected engine or even a turbine engine. All right, also, I know I keep saying this is super important and that's super important, but this is really important. Big difference I noticed when I flew it. So the Robinson R22, its interior is 3.7 feet wide, while the Cabri's interior is 4.1 inches wide. I mean, 3.7 versus 4.1, you're like, Devin, that's only 4 inches of interior space. That is a big difference. That makes a big difference. The reason why is anyone that's flown in a Robinson R22, you know that you're usually touching shoulders with the person next to you, and it's just cramped. Now you can make it work, and honestly, while I was going through flight training, I didn't really think about it. But as soon as I got into the Cabri and I was able to move the collective and the cyclic, and I had the cyclic in between my legs and the collective here, and like I'm not rubbing shoulders with the person next to me. Like it feels wider. Like those 4 inches make a massive difference. Like it just feels comfortable. So with all of that in mind, I have to give the design category to the Cabri as well. All right, moving on to features. Okay, by far the biggest difference in this category, and probably one of them between the helicopters, is the EPM. EPM stands for Electronic Pilot Management System, and basically it's a digital display of all the necessary relevant information. So specifically your RPMs, engine and rotor, all of your temperatures and pressures, all of your fuel and fuel calculations and time and flight information, your carburetor heat information, your main rotor gearbox chip information, and your tail rotor gearbox chip information. And basically what it does is it gives you everything that you need and everything that the Robinson gives you, but in a modern, clean, easy to read display. What was really important for me is when I got in, so in the Robinson, we have a manifold pressure display. This manifold pressure tells us how much engine power we're pulling. So what you'll do beforehand is you will calculate how high you're flying and the temperature you're flying at using a chart, and you'll get like 22.1 inches of manifold pressure. And then if you have carb heat up, you add a 0.9 to this. So that's cool and all, and yeah, it works, but when you're moving that collective, I mean, your manifold pressure needle is like moving and you can't really see exactly where it is. And if you're going from like 22.2 to 23.1, you can't see those very well. I mean, and I don't think that it's trying to be an exact science, but it's just a system that's not very accurate. However, with the EPM, if I raise that collective, I look over to the left and it says you're pulling 82, 83, 84. 70, whatever, percent power. Like that's how much power you have. And to have like a physical number, 0 to 100, that makes, I mean, that's just intuitive. That's how it should be. And when the R22 was being developed, they obviously didn't have this technology, but I'm glad Cabri has come along and just made, that's like the next logical progression. So that EPM, super cool, very obvious, it's what's needed. The other thing that I really like that it has is force trim. Basically, there is a trim switch on the cyclic, and what it does is if you're holding the cyclic and you're like, I want to go faster, you can push the cyclic forward, but you can also just hold that trim switch forward, and it's actually going to move the cyclic into a more forward position so that when you relax your hand, the cyclic kind of just holds its position there. And if you want the cyclic a little bit more to the right, because you're, for whatever reason, you just push that cyclic trim to the right, that switch to the right, and the cyclic will move to the right. Really nice. I mean, getting used to it, a little bit weird, but very intuitive. It's like a joystick on an Xbox controller. It just feels really good, and as soon as you have it, you're like, that makes a lot of sense, and it feels good. We're still talking about features here. I really like that feature, the cyclic trim. Another feature that, this is kind of gonna go into the safety portion, but the Robinson, it's the R22, its storage area is underneath the seat. The thing about these seats is they are designed to compact. So you can put 50 pounds of stuff underneath the seat, but also if you get into a crash, like let's say you have an engine failure and you glide level, you're doing a good auto rotation and you flare and then you level and you slam it down. If you have stuff underneath your seat, those seats that are designed to crash and absorb energy, they're gonna be less effective because there's stuff in there. However, on the Cabri, there's not space underneath, and they do have those energy absorbing seats, but they have a storage compartment behind the pilot, which is kind of like this big, it's not massive, but this big open area where you can store, like, think backpack, think purse, think carry-on, of 88 pounds of stuff in it. And what that does is that puts all that stuff back there, and then if you do get in a crash, those seats can absorb the impact, and you can they can collapse. And what Cabri says on their website is that these seats are designed to keep you alive and protect you in the event of a 2,000 foot per minute descent rate crash. So if you're descending at 2,000 feet per minute, which is pretty quickly, and you hit, they're technically going to be able to take that impact. Now, I'm not exactly sure the figures on the Robinson. I'm sure they kind of have a similar design, and from what I've heard, and what I know, they do have those crash compacting seats, but Cabri is very outspoken, and they talk a lot about these crash seats. What I also really like is that the Cabri can be upgraded with really nice avionics. So can the Robinson R22, but the Cabri just looks modern already, and so just adding like an Aspen unit or a Garmin 650, or it's got a swivel mount for an iPad mini in front of the pilot. It's just very modern and really well thought out. In terms of features, you can add a cargo hook, you can add inflatable floats. I can make this list longer and longer and just keep going, but I won't bore you with that. So when we talk about features, I have to give this one also to the Cabri. So if you're tracking at home, that is 3 for the Cabri and 0 for the Robinson R22. Okay, moving on to comfort and cool factor. So comfort, like I said, that extra space in between, invaluable. Like, that is a big deal. Feels really solid. Feel like I've got enough space to operate. I like that. However, weird thing about this helicopter. Pilot seat is the right seat. Left seat is the instructor seat. That's pretty much the same. However, if you are doing auto rotations, training auto rotations with a pilot in the right seat and an instructor in the left seat, the instructor has to open their door and prop it open so that he can reach his hand underneath the throttle on the collective so that it can be rolled off. The reason is, it is so tight on that left-hand seat with that door that they can't safely roll the throttle off. And how they prop this door open, from the flight experience that I saw, I don't know if every Cabri is like this, but I imagine so. You unlock the door, and then there's this little string that you attach, that's attached to the helicopter, that you loop around this part of the door, so it just gives you like an extra 2 inches of clearance. So like, you think about this and you're like, they designed this helicopter so nice, they really thought about everything, and it's like, did they overlook that, or is there a reason for it? And I'm not sure. And then you ask, like, is that a safety concern? Like, what if your engine fails? If your engine fails and there's like an instructor sitting in the left seat, they can still, to the best of my knowledge, they can still lower that collective and the door's not going to get in the way. And if your engine actually fails, you don't need to roll the throttle off because your engine shut off. You just need to get the collective down. But for practice auto rotations, the door has to be propped open and then the throttle can be rolled off. Okay, when we look at the cool factor, this is kind of like personal opinion. Robinson R22 looks good, but the 3 blades on the Cabri, and I like that shrouded, I'm gonna mess up this word, Fenestron tail rotor. I think it looks cool. One thing that you could say about it is, like, it's a big sail. It can catch a lot of wind, which can kind of give you like an LTE effect, loss of tail rotor effectiveness, because it's just such a big surface area. But I think it looks good and I like it, and it kind of just makes me feel good that it's safer back there and it's not gonna fall apart. I kind of have this weird thought in my mind, because I think I've heard it, but maybe it's just a myth, but like, the gearbox of the 22 and the 44 can be like ripped off by the wind in some weird situations. I don't know if it's true, but it just feels like on the Cabri, it looks and feels like a big solid piece that's not gonna fall apart. I don't know. And when we talk about the cool factor, I think the Cabri looks like it was built this decade, like within this time period of life, versus the Robinson R22. It literally wasn't, not holding that against them, but it was built in a different era with different technology, with different goals and different designs. So being a young person and coming into this industry in 2022, I like the way the Cabri looks. It looks like it's up to date. Okay, cool factor and comfort factor, we gotta talk about that center cyclic. Center cyclic, I just like. I want to be a helicopter pilot. I feel like a helicopter pilot. Nothing against the Robinsons. It's a fine design, but I like the center cyclic. Now with the comfort thing, just from doing research, the Cabri, you can order it and get air conditioning in it. Both the R22 and the Cabri have heating options. I think they come standard with a cabin heater, I think. But from what I researched, the Cabri can also get air conditioning. I know that the Robinson R44, the 4-seat helicopter, it can get, you can have air conditioning as an option in that helicopter, but I don't think the 22 can, but the Cabri G2 can. Okay, when it comes to cool and comfort, once again, I have to give this one to the Cabri. The next thing we have to talk about is safety. Okay, so when you talk about safety, engine reliability and engine performance, they have the same engine. They're both carbureted. Now the Cabri, and I won't lie to you, I'm not exactly totally confident about the ignition system. I know it's a little bit different in the Cabri than it is in the Robinson R22, and they have like a plasma something. I really don't know. I mean, relatively simple, same engine, both carbureted. The Cabri has a fuel pump, which is kind of a big deal, but I would say engine reliability is equal. But honestly, when it comes to safety, there are two things that set the Cabri apart. That 3-bladed articulated rotor system and the shrouded tail rotor. The 3-bladed rotor system gives you so much more inertia, and the biggest thing that everyone talks about is you cannot get into low G mast bumping with this type of rotor system. Anyone that knows Robinsons knows the SFAR 73 regulations and how that if you're in a position where you take the helicopter and you do a nosedive, you unload the rotor disc, the tail rotor produces a ton of power, you get this super rapid right roll, the pilot incorrectly responds by pushing left cyclic, and the main rotor hub strikes the main rotor mast, and you can have separation occur, and the tail boom can also be chopped off. You literally cannot get into mast bumping with the Cabri. I'm actually not going to say that. It's much harder to get into mast bumping with the Cabri. Also, that shrouded tail rotor, why is that safer? One, because people can't walk into it. You would think that people would be smart and you would think that we have eliminated that, but it's still a thing. I don't know when the most recent one is, but you can see how it could happen relatively quickly. In all honesty, like, I could see how I've not really been close to it, but I could definitely see how it could happen. That shrouded tail rotor is pretty awesome. Pretty safe design. As well as, when I flew it, I did not feel a lack of tail rotor authority. I felt that if I needed to turn the nose left or right, I could do what I needed to do to get it to go. However, the con with this articulated 3-bladed rotor system that's in the Cabri is ground resonance. And basically what ground resonance is if you set the helicopter down and hard, and a shock wave can travel up through the skids, through the fuselage, and knock those 3 blades out of phase, out of sync, and imbalance them. And what you would do in the event that this happened is you could pick the helicopter up, and picking it up is going to resync and rephase those blades, or you can try to shut it down. But in honesty, I would 100% take my chances with ground resonance than low G mast bumping. In addition, you have those crash-worthy seats in the Cabri. I don't want to really speak on the Robinson because I don't know exactly the specifications of their crash sheets, but they both do have crash sheets. But like I said, the Cabri really pushes and talks about how that 2,000 foot per minute descent, you're going to be okay. But helicopter pilots are still dying from the two biggest things: inadvertently flying into bad weather, IIMC, inadvertent meteorological conditions, flying into a cloud, losing awareness of the helicopter, and crashing happens all the time. Biggest killer. Also power lines. Practice safe practices by flying over the poles, being alert, trying to stay out of low-lying areas, just knowing where you operate. Those are still the biggest killers of helicopter pilots. Then the final thing we have to talk about is cost. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the opening sequence of the things I'm going to compare, but we're going to talk about cost. So the Cabri G2 costs new about $400,000, and the Robinson R22 costs new about $250,000. All right, so $150,000 more. That by itself is like a ton, but you're also getting a lot of value, a lot of safety out of it. But the Robinson, what it's got going for it is it's cheaper, maintenance is a lot easier, you can get parts, especially if you're in America, you can get parts relatively quickly. A lot of mechanics have experience on the Robinson. This is not, I don't know, I think there's probably less than, I'm not gonna guess. There's not that many Cabris in America. So getting parts, not as easy, not as many mechanics have experience on it. So when it comes to price, this one goes to the Robinson. The only thing that could kind of lean in Cabri's favor is apparently what I've heard is that the overhaul and maintenance and inspection timeline of the Cabri is much quicker than it is for the Robinson. Apparently an inspection and an overhaul for Robinsons takes longer, but I really can't speak to that much. I'm just telling you what I have heard. But for this category cost, I am gonna give it to Robinson. Okay, 6 categories evaluated, 5 points to the Cabri, 1 point to the Robinson. So it's not case closed just like that, like, oh, the Cabri is way better than the Robinson. Yes, it is. It is a better helicopter. However, it is a better helicopter because they learned from the Robinson. The Robinson R22 had been out for decades prior to the Cabri coming out. So they heard complaints, they had flown them, they knew what was wrong with it, and they were able to innovate and design the Cabri around it. It learned a ton from the Robinson R22, and all of its flaws, it was kind of able to fix. So yes, it's better, but it learned from this. So you have to give them both equal credit. But as it stands right now, if you just look at like a first place and a second place, the Cabri's in first. So this video, just the filming part has taken far longer than I expected. I imagine that the editing and putting it together is going to take a lot of time. So if you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Also, if you made it this far in the video, throw a French flag in the comments, a flag of France in the comments, so I know that you made it this far. And I want to leave you with 2 questions. 1, if you had a checkbook and you could write a check for any helicopter, would you choose either of these 2 helicopters, or would you choose something else? I mean, let's just say you had free reign. Like, you could choose any helicopter in the world. Would you still choose one of these? So put in the comments, put the number 1 and then answer that question. And then question 2, of these 2 helicopters, which is the better helicopter and why? And let me know if I missed any points, both on the Robinson and the Cabri. Are there any big light bulb things that I missed that you have? Let me know down in the comments below. I will interact with you. Guys, this video was long but fun. I love these helicopters. Big fan of them both. I'm looking forward to flying the Cabri even more. I've got lots of hours in the R22. It's a good helicopter. But if you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. But every Sunday I post a really in-depth video, deeply edited like this, where I really compare things. And then I also post videos on Wednesday, so subscribe for that. Also, go check out my podcast if you haven't already. It's called Chopper Talk with Devin Bowen. I interview guests around the helicopter industry, and sometimes I just talk by myself about helicopter stuff in a long-form podcast audio version. So there's 3 pieces of content coming out every week from me, all about helicopter stuff. So go check out Chopper Talk, link is in the description below. Subscribe for all the content here and drop that flag of France in the comments below. Take care, I'll see you guys later.